All right, we have critical mass. Yay.
Wonderful.
Okay. All right, Zoom people, are you ready to go? Okay, perfect. We see you, we hear you. All right, bonjour à tous. Hello, I am Pam Dixon. I'm founder and executive director of the World Privacy Forum, and I'm so pleased to be talking with all of you about this amazing topic, dis and misinformation. When I think about dis and misinformation, I think of the old rhyme of the ancient mariner, water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. It's like being surrounded by information, but it's so poisonous you can't drink it. That's what we're talking about today. And today we have absolutely amazing guests, and I'm so pleased to introduce everyone. So I am going to start with Amir Banifatimi. Amir, I'm going to let you introduce yourself more fully, and then Sebastian Hallensleben. And same with you. I know Sebastian well. And then we have Stephanie Ifaimi with Partnership on AI. Stephanie, it's such a pleasure. And then, of course, Ima Martinez, who is Vice President NVIDIA. So we have a mix of people.
Sorry.
The reason I am here today is because I lead the civil society work at OECD on AI with my co-chair Valeria Malanes from Argentina. So we're a Global North, Global South initiative. And as well, I worked with OECD as well as Sebastian on the principles for AI that OECD published. It was a wonderful effort. Little did we know in 2017, 18, and 19 what would become of the AI conversation. So let us hope we make good progress here today. So let's go ahead and I'd like each of the speakers, please. Let's start with you, Sebastian, and then we'll just roll through. Please give us your background and your initial thoughts on this. Take about 3 minutes each, and then we'll move into questions. Give us your perspective, just quick flash perspective on this.
Yeah, thank you, Pam, and also thank you for the organizers for providing the space for this panel. So my name is Sebastian Hallensleben. I'm wearing many hats, like most of us here, I think. So in my day job, so to speak, I'm leading the AI and digital trust area in a large technology association. I'm also, as Pam mentioned, filling several roles in the OECD, co-chairing the AI Risk and Accountability Group, and also contributing to the AI Futures Group and also to the Global Challenge effort, which we'll hear about more today. And I'm also chairing the AI Standardization Committee in Europe that is creating all the standards that are going to underpin the European AI Act and are actually designed to make sure that the terms such as transparency, such as robustness that are contained in the AI Act get a way of being implemented and a way of being measurable and enforceable. My involvement with generative AI actually goes back to 2018 when deepfakes came out. And at the time, it got me very, very concerned because I saw that one trend that was already present then and goes back decades or even longer, namely the trend to have disinformation online, is all of a sudden becoming scalable, automatable. So if you're a shady review broker that takes money from, I don't know, a cosmetic surgeon to promote services with fake patient testimonials, yeah, previously you had to pay around 10 euros was the going rate to students and click workers to post reviews. With generative AI, that's no longer necessary. You can generate reviews in arbitrary scale and arbitrary numbers and post them. So that completely skews the dynamics of the digital space. Similarly, on the non-commercial side, if you're the head of the, for example, of Vladimir Putin's Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg, that employs around 300 people to take talking points from the Kremlin in the morning and distribute them in social media throughout the day. Well, previously, if you wanted to double or triple the influence or the impact that you have as such an outfit, you had to find a few hundred extra people with the right combination of language skills, of conversational skills to be able to influence discourse, and a lack of ethics. And that's a relatively small intersection. So again, there used to be a limit to scalability. With generative AI, there no longer is. And I spent the years since 2018 working on solutions, which we'll get to in the conversation, but also awareness raising. And it's great to see that with the breakthrough in ChatGPT late last year, the awareness raising can pretty much stop and we can go full throttle on solutions. Thank you.
Well said. Definitely the awareness raising is there. Stephanie, please introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about what you think about this.
Hey everyone, can you hear me, Pam?
Yes, if you can speak up just a wee bit, that would be great.
Okay, please flag if you can't hear me. But it's fantastic to be here today. Thank you so much to the organizers for the invitation. I'm Steph Ifayemi. I'm the head of policy partnership on AI, but I also, similar to Sebastian, sit on a few groups, including contributing to work at the OECD, the Council of Europe, sort of the Chatham House Task Force on AI and Society, amongst others. But at PAI, we're a sort of non-profit that brings together 100 partners across 14 countries. And so we sort of bring together industry, so sort of large AI companies, but also smaller companies, civil society and academia. And really we're sort of thinking about how do we identify emerging trends in the AI space over time, how do we take collective action, but most importantly, how do we build tools and guidance to tackle questions? And earlier this year, an example that is really relevant to this topic is PAI's release of our synthetic media framework, where we launched guidance on how to responsibly develop and deploy synthetic media with a number of companies, including Microsoft and OpenAI, and media companies such as the BBC and CBC, and also civil society. So our model is very much, how do we do this from a multi-stakeholder perspective? But before PAI, I came into this space, I think, as a government, very much from a government perspective. I was in the UK government where I led our work on AI standards and technical standards. So hi, Sebastian. I know Sebastian very well. And I think my portfolio covered AI, but also internet standards. And so one thing I want to bring into this discussion is a lot of questions that we have around disinformation and misinformation aren't necessarily new to the AI space. But I think Sebastian is right that the moment that we are in is sort of seeing the scalability of information and misinformation, and the speed question that we often come to in the policy debate is, I think, a really interesting one. I think our understanding of AI's impact is being, of course, to some extent outpaced by the rapid development and deployment of large-scale AI models. And I strongly believe that we kind of need to answer sort of four questions as part of this discussion today and going forward. And one is around the need to grow consensus at the technical level and at the international level. So one thing that I'm sure we'll come back to is, what do we actually mean by watermarking? It means different things to different people. And what could consensus look like if we aren't able to sort of have a shared taxonomy of what we mean, or how you sort of do technical watermarking? And therefore, what does that mean for interoperability at the international level if we're sort of taking different approaches? The role of citizens. How do citizens and specific stakeholders play a role in the design, development, and deployment of models, and particularly in our understanding of risk mitigation or tools to tackle disinformation? And then lastly, I just want to point to the fact that we are, I think, at an important juncture. And at PAI, we talk about the looming elections across many jurisdictions next year. And so I think we're having this discussion at the right time. So thanks to the organizers for sort of convening us all.
We can't hear you from the auditor.
Just realized.
Can you hear us yet? Okay, I think we have action. Inma, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Inma, go ahead and tell us what your background is and where you think, what are your quick flash opinions on this issue and where might we achieve consensus?
Thank you so much, Pam. I'm sorry to disappoint, but I do not work for NVIDIA. I
Oh,
wish I would, because my shares will be worth loads of money today. The company is doing exceedingly well. I am a technologist. I am considered one of the pioneers of the mobile internet in 1998. And at the same time, with my teams in Cambridge University and Trinity College in Dublin, we built the first AI that would be used as a recommender system and personalization of many of the mobile internet services of the early 2000s. I have built many AI systems for the automotive industry and also for smart cities. And with regards to generative AI, I have been researching and testing many human conversational bots, from retrieval methods to generative methods. And always intending to ensure that humans had a notion that they were talking to a machine and not to another human being. So my intent is always to make sure that the conversations are correct and are fluid, but also that the human at the other end knows that it's talking to a machine. I currently serve as the chair of the multi-stakeholder expert group at the Global Partnership on AI. And my experience as an AI scientist has been private sector, building products and services that were powered by AI. And with regards to our topic today, my angle is not so much, wondering if we will be ever find technologies that will help us fight deep fakes and a lot of the misinformation, but more to do with changing the principles, changing the business models in the marketplace so that the companies that actually disseminate the big deep fakes and the big misinformation begin to take ownership of what happens within their realms and begin to put measures themselves. I was serving as an advisor to the board of one IFRA between 2005 until 2009, is the Association of Newspaper Publishers in the world, just when they were considering digitizing newspapers. And this sector has suffered a tremendous downturn, economic loss of margins, and therefore they had to withdraw many of the foreign correspondents that were placed in faraway lands that could fact check what was happening. And they began to be very dependent on wires, on Reuters, on Agence Presse, and therefore the fact checking beginning to be really hard to do. And many of them that publish news on a daily basis, they don't have fact checking as a standard. Only the top tier one newspapers that we all read, the New York Times, the Guardian, the Wall Street Journal, they do have fact checking as the prime tool to verify many and qualify news. And I think that generative AI, although we would look for technological solutions such as watermarking, and try to improve the content ownership verification, which is what watermarking does, we need to make a huge effort as a society to start educating people, start educating audiences, and start educating social platforms. I would not call them media, because that would be an insult to the real media that is written by proper journalists and tremendous professionals. So I would talk about social platforms and media companies. And I think we need to start thinking what models of data verification do we have in addition to any other technology that we deploy and invent to fight generative AI misinformation? So that's going to be my angle.
I'm liking this a lot. So what I've heard so far is each of you, in your own way, in different ways, each of you are proposing to go to the source of one sort of another. So standards, baseline principles, and then the source of, for example, corporate misbehavior, actually mischief, which is contributing to the problem, and also watermarking. So I think that this is a good insight, because I think we all have the instinct that we're not going to solve this problem by playing, it's an Americanism, whack-a-mole. We're not going to be able to look at each piece of disinformation at scale. It's just not going to happen. So go to the source. Amir, please introduce yourself and tell us what is your take on this issue, and then we'll engage.
Thank you. Thank you, Pam. Hi, everyone. I'm Amir Beni Fatemi. My background is a technology entrepreneur. I've started a number of companies. My most focus was expert systems and machine learning and statistics and robotics. So I've been navigating this environment, mostly applied to healthcare, surgical robot, but also prediction for cancer or mitigation for public policy issues. So around statistical methods and prediction and mitigation, and also interaction in terms of product and services. Coming out of that, I started becoming an investor and investing in the same domain, which is mostly machine learning and technologies related to that. It was not always called AI, it was not called machine learning in the early days, but since 10 years ago now, we're talking about that. What's interesting for me is that I started seeing the changes of public perception of AI around 2010, 2011, when there's basically coming out of the labs and there's more observation about that some techniques are basically reviving all these promises that we had. And then maybe AI has a new wave behind it. And at that time, we started working on a number of investment strategies. And what appeared to us is that there is the enterprise aspect that is going to win. There is a number of products and services that enterprise will adopt very quickly because it brings automation, it brings productivity, safety, and so forth. But there is a layer of public benefit that doesn't necessarily shine. And we never heard about anyone pitching a story or a startup about public benefits or AI for good. So in 2015, I joined forces with a company called XPRIZE. And we launched the very first global AI challenge called the AI XPRIZE, which we basically called the AI for Good prize. And then out of that, the whole AI for Good movement, I think, was more visible to many. For that exercise, we realized one thing is that AI can be applied to many of the sustainable development goals in many ways, but there is a number of holes, like a Gruyere, in the accomplishment of that. One of these holes is really understanding from regulatory bodies and policymakers about what is safe to use, what is beneficial to people, how much does it cost, is it going to be adopted by different groups, is it culturally adopted, what is the provenance of information they're going to be using, a number of questions that are obvious now today, but they were not necessarily in 2015. Another issue is that we're going very fast and generative AI is coming now. But before generative AI, we had all these capabilities through platform to platform capabilities hidden from the public. Now we are basically the public having a user interface to those systems. And that user interface scares everyone because we see dominantly misinformation, but also disinformation, which I think one of my points is that we need to make a distinction between the two. And maybe you're going to be talking about it today. So the notion of bad actors. So in my experience, actually, I'm also part of GPay. I'm a co-chair of one of the working groups on scaling responsible AI. So we're working very closely with IMA, but also on IEEE, working on AI certification, ethical code of conduct. I'm working with ISO, many others like Sebastian. I'm very interested in standardizations that could provide some element of checks and balances and benchmarking, but also unifications about collaboration between different stakeholders, so that objective and fact checking, I think, is important. Now, talking about today's topic, I think for me, the majority of issues relate to trust and only trust. So trust for me is that trust in our system, trust in our government, trust in our deployment of scenarios. And education is a big part of that, because misinformation can be probably tackled with education. Disinformation necessarily cannot. So I entered this discussion with this notion of massive education for the public, but also huge collaboration, because as we're going to be discussing today, there's no silver bullet to these issues that we're discovering. But probably if we can find a way to generate trust among us, we can probably display more effort, demonstrate results, have some benchmarks, and probably invest more toward the public good side of that, which is something that I care about.
A couple of things here, just some responses to this. So first, I'm really glad that you mentioned cost. It's not something that's typically brought up in a panel like this. But when we mitigate a problem, there's going to be a cost, and someone is going to pay that cost. So does the cost flow to governments, to small businesses, to just the large businesses? Does it flow a little bit to the consumer? Does it flow to the financial services folks? Where does the cost go? I don't think we yet have an answer, and I think that will be deeply debated. I do recall that when there was very significant identity theft and identity fraud, particularly in the global north, that the cost went to the financial services companies, primarily the banks and the credit card issuers. And those problems were solved with anti-fraud technologies. So anti-fraud technologies are great. We can use our mobiles and our credit cards really easily across jurisdictions and across the world. But there is a little bit of a downside. And the downside is there's a cost, but there's a cost to our privacy as well. Anti-fraud information is a lot of profiling information about us that allows, obviously, the companies to distinguish between the good actors and the bad actors. Dis and misinformation appears to be slightly different than this. It's a slight variation. But I do believe that I like your idea, Amir, of checks and balances. So I'm very interested in hearing all of you on what you think. What are the potential unintended consequences? I hear a lot of consensus from all of you in regards to going to the source, watermarking in various ways, but for your chosen method or methods of solving the problem, what are the unintended potential consequences, and how would you ensure that there are checks and balances, particularly for privacy and for data protection and things like that? Let's see. We haven't started with you yet. Ima, go ahead and start.
Well, I agree with Amir in not so much going to the source, but establishing the mindset in the marketplace. So if most people have a mistrust of news or a mistrust in governments, or they believe that the media is owned by politicians, like so the mistrusting the information, then that's the opportunity gap that people that distribute misinformation and disinformation use to then put in the market other types of news that will get super scale up dissemination. Yeah. So fundamentally, even though AI, the big muscle of AI is how fast this thing is spread and also how easy it is to be put together, we need to put in place a society that learns that the first thing you do when a piece of news arrives to you and it sounds quite extraordinary is to assume that it's false. And I'm going to mention something that many people do not know, but when Titanic sank, the big newspapers the next day, many of them published headlines such as "Titanic sinking, no lives lost, passengers transferred to the Cunard liner Carpathia, all are now safe." Yeah, I have that headline from the Vancouver World, which was a newspaper that prided itself underneath their name. They published this motto, the paper that prints the facts. So we need to start thinking, are people reading the news in the places that can be fact-checked, that can be verifiable? Are we educating people to understand when news come to market, how they should interpret them? And I think the state of the world is going through quite a crisis because freedom of speech is not widespread around the world. You can just check the statistics on Reporters Sans Frontières. You know, it's not, you know, all not is well in the hands of freedom of speech. And also financial markets use social media to embed data sets into their own forecast. I remember when the CEO of BlackRock had to write to all of the shareholders in 2016 explaining why they were following certain market movers' Twitter accounts. So before we embed all the onus on technology, for example, DeepMind has successfully developed something called Synth ID that embeds watermarking within the pixels. So you and I as humans don't notice, don't see anything, but the pixels show you if there is a watermarking or not. All of that is very useful to track who owns this content. Has this photo been copied from the rightful owner? But that's not really what concerns governments. Governments concern about the people, about the state of the world. My picture is a legal situation of somebody needs to pay me money because this is my image, right? But what we are concerned is what happens when people assume that something is true and it creates havoc and it challenges our democracies. And I think that rather than putting the emphasis on technology, we need to ask ourselves, what is it that we can do to prove that when a news network or a newspaper puts something out, it is factual, it's not biased, it's not controlled by political opinions, and that is very analog, and that is very abstract and non-technological to achieve.
Technology of information systems, analog or otherwise. And so you're making a case for media literacy here. And, you know, we're long out of the silver bullet era. There's never going to be just one solution for this. So let's take your suggestion on board. Keep that thought. We'll have some audience questions. Sebastian, what's your shot?
Well, I have to admit, I'm deeply skeptical of almost all the traditional solutions that have helped us in the past against disinformation. Media literacy is a very, very good thing and still is, but it hits its limits when disinformation, when fakes get too good, when bots get too good, which they now are with generative AI. And media literacy also has this implicit assumption that individuals are responsible for their own gullibility, if you like, for want of a better word. And I think it's a bit unfair to just push the responsibility for spotting fakes to individuals when it's becoming so hard or even impossible. So media literacy is always good, but I don't think it necessarily helps us with generative AI. With more watermarking, I think we have to look quite carefully where it can play a very important role. So Inma mentioned Synth ID. There's also the Adobe Content Authenticity Initiative that essentially provides an unbroken chain from the generation of an image or a video all the way through all the editing and transfer and publishing steps all the way to someone seeing it. And for certain applications, that is good. And I think we should develop those technologies. What I would argue, though, is that it doesn't cover all the use cases. It doesn't cover the bad actors polluting the digital space with fakes and pretend human beings. And it also hits its limits when we talk about text, because text inherently doesn't contain enough data to imprint watermarks. And the same distinction is actually true for detection tools, where again, in text, you simply do not have enough data to make a good distinction. And as far as images and video is concerned, as soon as you have built a detection tool that is reasonably effective, and we heard in the previous session that even that is hard, well, you can train that, use that detection tool to train your fabrication tool until it can evade detection. So I'm very deeply skeptical about that. And I think we have to think much more fundamentally about solutions that do not break down with the next advance in generative AI, the next advance in being able to fabricate better, evade detection better. And I fundamentally believe that the solutions for handling generative AI are not primarily found in the space of governing generative AI or generative AI technology, but are much more fundamental in how we think about trust in the digital space, how we gain trust, and what the infrastructures and the protocols are that we need for that.
So that's an interesting take, because really you're talking about trust architectures. And when you start talking about trust architectures, you immediately move into the realm of digital ID. There are 4 types of digital ID. You've got some plain Jane digital ID. You've got a mobile ID standard. You have a centralized platform standard, which is kind of the third choice. Then, of course, you have the most advanced choice in the world, which is a decentralized digital ID, which you will really only find in India use case, the Aadhaar ecosystem, which is biometric iris and fingerprint and now face as well. So we had a very robust conversation today about the use of biometrics. Biometrics, especially face, are a controversial technology. So I think that there is going to have to be a very interesting conversation about digital ID forms and how we want to manage those forms and what are the guardrails for that. So we'll need guardrails for the deepfakes, and we'll need guardrails for the ID systems. And strangely enough, there's an extraordinary nonprofit that works in Africa called ID for Africa. And because of the work of a very dedicated NGO team, the African ecosystem around ID is very, very well guarded and has beautiful guardrails. And it's not perfect, but it's really, really good. Better, certainly better than many other countries. That's just food for thought. Stephanie, actually, Amir, let's go to you. And then Stephanie, let's give you the closing thought, and then we'll pop over to questions. I'm very intrigued to hear what your takes are on this.
Thank you, Pam. I tend to concur with what Sebastian said in terms of we cannot really combat deepfakes. To put it bluntly, there are deepfakes that we know, deepfakes that we don't know. What's happening in the future, we cannot predict. And also deepfakes can be built to basically detect methods to detect them, basically evade those methodologies. So it's an ongoing race to that. There is also the issue that the third parties have to do basically verification of deepfakes. If you make the assumption, as Sebastian suggested, that we cannot have the general public be aware fully of what's right, what's wrong, and we should not assume that they have this responsibility. Somebody else has to take this responsibility. So who's that somebody else? How many third parties we have to basically elect and elicit to be this guardian of information, and how this information can be proved legally right or culturally okay or economically viable? Because trust has to do with the context in which we consume the information. So if it's general news, that's one thing. If it's basically going to the movies, we have Rotten Tomatoes, we have other tools that gives you basically a public opinion about topics, but there is no such things organized yet today. So we're basically in this new era where we are discovering. So I still believe that there is a general public education about responsible AI. What are the risks? What are the issues? Without letting them to make that distinction about what is fake, what's not fake, but having this awareness and this general culture, because they need to to work with regulators and elect people that are working on those aspects. So this is important information for those electors to be working with those regulators and policymakers that do understand these issues and basically not only promote transparency and fairness, but also invest into platforms and systems that will help us really be building that trust. The issue of trust is a complex issue because trust is not a one-sided topic. It's basically a chain of trust. So the chain of trust, as Ina was saying, well, we can talk about sources. We can make sure this article from the BBC was written by a PhD in physics and only validated by his peers and is open to this journal and this documentary. And there's a whole chain that never been touched or manipulated. And of course, we can enforce usage of generative AI content to be disclosed all the time. So we know that there is a chance of manipulation or a chance of misinformation. I'm not talking about manipulation, just misinformation. But while we do that, the web of information usage with all these APIs and interconnection of information is so vast that is, and this is where I rejoin Sebastian, is that imaginable that we can figure out necessary ways to combat that. So going back, regulators today and policymakers are trying to catch up with technology. Everybody's trying to catch up with technology. There is a asymmetry about those who know about what's happening and those who don't know what's happening, the amount of money they spend. If you talk about deepfake and using basically methods to identify any form of manipulation, there's a computational cost. And now going back to the cost, that computational cost is not negligible. And if you talk about millions of people and billions of people using that, somebody has to bear that cost. So we go to sovereign funding and governments. Our governments are really getting playbooks and blueprints about what works, what doesn't, and how basically they can collaborate with NGOs, policymakers, companies that are building. So the issue is a little bit more complex. I think there are methods and incentives to be built to go for novel innovations, and maybe challenges and incentives like that could be helping identify very novel leapfrogging solutions to identify how we can be better. But at the same time, there should be some collaboration between academia and industry to really work together about release systems. So what's going in academia, what's being developed has to be released carefully to sandboxes, regulated sandboxes that are safe, and then released to the general public gradually. So we have models like FDA, like the medical field, but other models like education curricula. You cannot just put things out there. They go through some strata. So if we adopt some of those, that can be probably a little bit of safeguarding for the time being. But I believe personally that we need to work on trust, and we need to basically incentivize massively about novel solutions. I think the solutions we have are basically band-aids to what we know. We don't know what we don't know, so we need to discover more.
This reminds me of a situation with a standards-making body, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. In 2016, they began testing algorithms against quantum decryption, and their basic goal in 2016 was to find some candidate algorithms that would survive quantum cryptography. And they've found 3, 1 failed, so now they've got 2. It's 2023, it took them this long to find 2 candidate algorithms. And as computing gets better, the fight will also advance very quickly in real time. It's absolutely fascinating, but I was very encouraged by the NIST algorithm candidates, because I thought, I wonder if a quantum computer could at least fight this for a while. Maybe a little win in the arms race for a shining moment. Stephanie, you're going to get the very last intervention before we move to questions. What's your take on this, Stephanie?
Awesome. Thanks so much, all. I agree with so many of the comments sort of made so far. I think for me, such a fundamental part is trust in the information ecosystem. I mentioned sort of elections next year is the one thing that's always looming in the back of my mind, like how will this play out in such an important context in 2024. So I think trust, and I think more widely though, and I know standards have come up through this debate or this discussion, I think the levers that government turns to resolve this question will be pretty important generally. And I think it will also speak to how we design things like standards. How will standards play a role? Traditionally, we've relied on assurance ecosystem, certification, etc., when it comes to the deployment of certain types of technologies. And so I think that this is a very interesting use case for us to resolve, and I think will play a role in thinking about how we think about policy levers and regulation and technical solutions through standards in the future. But I think two things I want to focus on here. So the White House, of course, had these voluntary commitments with companies quite recently. And one core aspect of that was actually on watermarking, so sort of watermarking synthetic media. And of course, I think it was a fantastic move by the White House, but questions that continue to come up is, one, how do you operationalize? So what does good look like? And I think that that continues to be a question in this space. Even if we have the sort of top level principles about what we want to achieve, how do we agree on the sort of implementation aspect? So I'll have a few thoughts on that. And then the second is the who gets to have a say. And I think I've seen that through a lot of the things that that Sebastian, Inma, and Amir have mentioned so far. And for me, that very much comes back to citizens and civil society. So of course we have the education aspect, but I think it's also before that also, how do these stakeholders have a say in also what operationalization actually looks like, given these will be the folks that will ultimately be interacting with watermarks on a day-to-day basis. And so to just come back to a few points, one, I think that's going to be important from a policy and technical perspective is the foundational standards and definitions. Through my government space in AI standards, traditionally sort of thinking about definitions and taxonomies is somewhere that we've always traditionally started. But what I think we're seeing in the sort of space here is that we can't actually agree on what we mean ultimately by different forms of disclosures and even watermarking. And so I think a next step, and to kind of resolve some of those questions around the implications in this space, we need to be clear on what a watermark is, what we can reasonably expect them to do, I think that those are sort of two components that we really, really need to think about. I heard direct and indirect disclosure already come up. What are the sort of best practices and when should we deploy direct versus indirect? I think is also going to be quite important for outcomes too. But clarity ultimately, I think, is important for a core aspect like robustness. So Pam, you sort of mentioned the NIST risk management framework. One of the sort of the risk management framework, I think, has been important traditionally as a guide for the types of core components that we want to achieve with models. So security, bias mitigation, and one of them is, of course, robustness. And I think that robustness or clarifying what we mean from a foundational standard perspective in terms of definitions, taxonomies will be important, because then we have agreement again on what good looks like and what steps need to ultimately be taken before models might be deployed, for example, that can produce synthetic media. And then going back to implications generally, I think one thing that we've also heard through our work on synthetic media is that there's, of course, a technical question, but technical questions also have implications for other things like privacy and citizens. So one question that has come up recently is around watermarking and the preserving of privacy. So what types of information will be embedded in sort of watermarks, for example? And one of our partners on the civil society side has also flagged, again, that when we go back to bad actors, we often talk about how bad actors might be able to manipulate or avoid certain types of disclosures. But we also haven't turned to the debate where having a watermark, which includes certain types of information or potentially information that has privacy implications in certain countries, could actually be harmful to some extent to certain citizens. And so we need to be thinking about carefully if, for example, in certain jurisdictions there aren't sort of privacy protections or human rights protections, how do we think carefully about what goes into disclosures and what's the impact on individuals in those contexts? And then lastly, I'll quickly mention in terms of implications and the who gets to have a say. I think that there's an oversight and governance question here, and then there's an input on the citizen side. On the oversight and governance side, when I was in the UK government and we were sort of designing or thinking about the UK's white paper for regulating AI generally, a question that kept coming up is the oversight on regulators. And I think that there's a general question here as to even once we have disclosures and certain processes in place, who is the sort of relevant authority to sort of oversee how this sort of plays out? And so would it be traditionally sort of media regulators such as the ICO in the UK who would have sort of jurisdiction in the space, or do we actually see a more cross-cutting role given that there could be implications that impact a number of the domains for several different types of regulators? And so I think there are also many infrastructural questions that continue to come up. And I know we mentioned cost. I think even cost on the government side is something that will be important to consider. And then lastly, I just want to sort of make a call again. Something that we are doing at PAI is we have a new not a new program, but we launched in March alongside the White House, who are closely engaged in this work, a sort of work to develop a blueprint for how citizens can have a say in the design and deployment of models. And I think that this is a core aspect or a core area where you can see the importance of citizens sort of having a say. Like, what does disclosure actually need to look like for people to really understand what it means, and how do we design it with input from citizens themselves? So yeah, I'll stop there, Pam.
Glad you brought all of that up. You know, we cannot design technology where only elite individuals have an input. And I know you really believe that, Stephanie. And I would go further and say we need to make sure that all of the jurisdictions are able to access this technology so we don't leave entire countries behind, particularly in the global south. Thank you all. Let's take some questions. Yes, please. Let's start with you in the blue shirt, and then I see someone with a light hand up. And
Thanks.
We'll start with those two.
Thanks a lot. It was very interesting. I didn't introduce myself, actually. Simon Hardy, founder of Cities AI. It's a startup working exactly on this topic, and we've developed a governance model involving citizens in the definition of taxonomy, ontology, and we have a proof of concept. We were actually involved with the EIC to get fundings, and indeed it's a question of trust. You were talking about the identity as well. We have to think in the ecosystem. So now the EU is in the verge of deploying the digital wallet, European digital wallet. So we have to take care of that as well, to think in a systemic way. And we're lagging a bit behind as well, private sector, because we're talking about watermark, but we have NewsGuard. NewsGuard was already doing, you know, those E, B, C, D in order to read the news. And this morning we were talking about the war in Ukraine, and it's sad to say, but thanks or because the war in Ukraine, they've changed a bit their scope. And now they're as well trying to identify misinformation, but originally it was only to protect the brand. And again, we don't know who's behind. And that's why there is no trust. Who's behind? NewsGuard, who's behind as well? Jigsaw, because Jigsaw, they're very good at putting guidelines, but who's behind Jigsaw? And I don't even have to put the name between us because we know it. So here, it's again a matter of avoiding populism, actually, due to the mistrust. And again, a lot of actors are working on this field. For instance, I'm here in this, with you. A friend of mine is in Berlin in a different kind of conference with more activist people, but we are not working together. We're talking about the same thing, but we are looking the synergies sometimes. So I will stop there because it's not really a question, because I fully agree with you. It's a matter of ontology, defining with citizen, having in place a new agora, and the new agora actually is the internet. And for us, and our slogan is the social contract of the information age. And we have to take care of that and involving the citizen.
So I would suggest to you that you reach out to especially Stephanie Ifahimi, because the Partnership on AI accepts the work of other nonprofits globally, right, Stephanie? Yeah. So you can begin to work in that avenue. And I think wherever we can find consensus, I mean, even if it's a small patch, I think we should take it. And I think it's really important for civil society to have a very meaningful voice here, because that is part of the way we will find the check and balance. Thank you. Thank you for your comments. So I will leave you and Stephanie to follow up with each other. And we had, yes, I see you. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Anita Lamprecht. I'm here again as a private researcher and also for the Liquid Legal Institute, that's a legal think tank. Who should be on the boat? I think also the legal industry is missing here in this discussion. I think that misinformation is indeed a legal problem. There are laws around the world that try to prevent misinformation. So I think we should also be involved in this discussion, and I've been missing the legal industry more or less today.
Well, thank you for your input. So I would say that it's going to be very important for you to deal with the data protection authorities, who are almost exclusively attorneys, who will be very well tuned into this conference. Or this issue. They have a conference once a year. It's always in October, and you can go to the public sessions. It will be in Bermuda this year. It's in a different country each year. I think that would be a very good place to start, among other more technical conferences where you could bring your idea and business cards and begin to create connections. I think it's a great idea. So that is your place of finding rough consensus. More hands. You had your hand up, and then we will finish with your last word.
Thank you for your discussion. The comment on the legal industry is very on point, because the legal industry doesn't really care about proofs, about secure proofs right now, and we will discuss those things at the EDV Gerichtstag in Germany next week. So, or this week. So. I agree that we have to take care of the fact that current proofs are not valid anymore, or will not be valid anymore. So analog proofs, even handwriting, even any kind of picture, any kind of photo, any kind of text, will not be secure anymore. We have technology that is secure, and I'm not talking about digital ID. I'm talking about cryptography, and of course you have to go for quantum proof cryptography. You can have secure devices. You can have a trace from the device who took the photo or the video till the end result, where you can prove the result that it was not manipulated and how it was processed. This is possible. Of course, this is a great effort. We had a technology invented, discussed a lot of times before, that was exactly made for this purpose, which is blockchain, and to create this kind of proofs. Of course, it has its own issues. We have versions of blockchain that are not energy war, that are sustainable. We can use this, but it's a puzzle. We need to put this puzzle together. And we need to have legal people. I've got a legal background, and computer science people. I've got a computer science background as well, and put them together and to find solutions that are future-proof. And this is still missing. Organization. They are the standards for quantum-proof cryptography, and but it will take time. It might take a bit too long to really solve the issue in time.
So, Sebastian, if slow horses aren't working, what's a fast horse?
Well, I'd like to just refer back to the question about involvement of the legal community, which was a topic in both the last two contributions. And I'd also like to combine it with the question, well, what does the policymaking community actually do about it? So within OECD, we've recently started an effort on a global challenge of digital trust, because we realized that policy responses need to be developed much, much more rapidly than they used to be developed in previous years or responding to previous technologies. So we launched a call for partners a few weeks ago. There's been a very, very broad response already, including many law firms as well. And this is important and crucial because law firms will have a crucial role to play, both from the perspective of how can we safeguard evidence, but also from the perspective of how do we safeguard rights to privacy and balancing that with the need to talk about identities. And I think the key there will be pseudonymous identities. So this global challenge is underway. It'll be formally launched in the next few months. And if you want to know more about it, I'd encourage you to have a word with Jamie Berryhill, who happens to be here over there, raising his hand. But he's also the tall guy, so he'll stand up out in the reception later on. And this is a very, very major effort that will address some of the issues that have been raised, and it's also quite open. So any contribution there is welcome.
And it is open to civil society. It is open to really all, as well as individuals. So you guys have had great questions. Panelists, thank you so much. That was a fantastic conversation. I appreciate it so much. I learned something from each of you. Thank you. Thank you all. Let's give them a hand, and thank you, audience. You were great.